Um, our last keynote speaker is also from University of Technology, Sydney. It is my pleasure to invite Codee Ludbey to give you a speech. I think we are going to finish on terrorism stuff again. Is that right? Okay, I'm looking forward to it. Codee is from University of Sydney, Technology, Sydney, a seasoned security management professional and academic known for his expertise in merging security placemaking and urban design principles to create secure built environments. Codee has a particular expertise in crowded places design with a focus on protective security and counterterrorism planning. I'm looking forward to your talk. Please welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the last session of the day. I'd like to thank the sponsors of this event for hosting such a great couple of days, and very happy to be finishing today for everybody. Today, I want to talk to you about the security of public places, principles and practices for integrated security in the built environment. I'm going to start with a bit of my professional background, specifically in the transport sector, to contextualise this conversation within transit-oriented development and railway stations. And then the second half of this presentation will dive into some of the preliminary findings of my PhD, which I'm close to finishing. So don't judge the findings too hard yet. I still need to finalise them. But I wanted to start with this quote from Mike Davis, Fortress Los Angeles, published in 1992. This was in a very difficult time in Los Angeles. Crime was skyrocketing, homelessness was skyrocketing, and we were seeing in the US this march towards more and more physical security protection and gated communities. And what he says is that the universal consequence of the crusade to secure the city is the destruction of any truly democratic space. This is before 9/11. After 9/11, we saw this supercharged even further. Public places have become very heavily protected, particularly in the West, and this is disrupting community bonds and making people feel paradoxically quite unsafe. As mentioned, I want to contextualise this just to give you an idea of some real-world examples of this within the context of transit-oriented development. So, as we continue to urbanise and more people live in cities, we see more rail precincts being delivered, brand new, and as part of those new railway stations, typically we find significant public realm attached to it. We want to turn railway stations into public places where people gather, can live, play and connect. It's not just a transitory area. Unfortunately, because train stations are typically quite crowded places, they also attract significant interest from malicious actors such as terrorists. To give you an idea of the scale of the investment in rail transport, just in the last 10 years, we've spent over $3.7 trillion on new railway assets. That's stations, that is rail, that is electrification and substations, that's maintenance facilities and so on. Typically, when these assets are designed and delivered, we're thinking on at least a 100-year timescale. You don't build a train station to demolish it in 10 years. You want it to be around for the foreseeable future. But 100 years is a very long time to think about something like security and terrorism. And in fact, we find since 2000, there have been over 152 terrorist attacks on railway stations and rail infrastructure. This has led to over 200 deaths, over 1,500 people seriously injured, and over $2 billion in losses if you just consider the loss of the human life. This doesn't include impacts to infrastructure and repair cost. It doesn't include operational impacts. It doesn't include long-term tourism and GDP loss that you see after major terrorism incidents globally. So you can see for a small number of incidents globally, quite a significant impact, which means that security planners for critical infrastructure and public precincts have had to respond to this risk, sometimes in ways that may be slightly too risk adverse based on the true likelihood. If we look at some figures, it's very hard to estimate this. So we've gathered from a few industry reports that global security investment since 2015 is about $80 billion, which is significant in the context of station design, precinct design, and so on. So what does this investment actually look like on the ground? Rail transport is government, and government typically is quite risk adverse. So we end up with quite significant security infrastructure. This station, Crow's Nest Station, recently opened last year. It's part of a brand new fully autonomous metro network in Sydney. And Crow's Nest is in the outskirts or outer areas of the CBD. It's more of a suburban station. You can see on the street here the significant amount of security bollards. And three of these will run you about $150,000. So you can see where that $80 billion can get spent quite quickly. Some would argue that this is out of scale for where this train station is. And in fact, this bollard line extends the entire way around this building to the building across the road and the building behind it as well, because there are multiple entrances. Because we have significant underground infrastructure, the idea is to protect against a variety of threats, not just vehicles driving into crowds, but also standing off potential vehicle-borne blast events. So if we look even further at other stations on this line, a Barangaroo station, for example, which is much closer to the city, a significant amount of security infrastructure yet again. This is meant to and is in the centre of quite a community-orientated outdoor area. So you can start to see how security infrastructure spending can sometimes be out of step with the local community and the local area that it is within. Further examples, this is in the CBD. You can see the fixed assets next to the palm tree type elements, and then these blue blobs. These are concrete barriers that have been covered, and in fact they're temporary, but they've temporarily been there for over 5 years. Circular Quay, if you think about Sydney, Australia, you're thinking about this area. Just to the left, you can kind of see it under the infrastructure here is the Harbour Bridge, and just out to the right is the Sydney Opera House. This is the preeminent destination in Sydney and arguably Australia. These temporary white hostile vehicle mitigation measures have been there for at least 5 years. So you can see how security decisions made in response to these terrorism risks can have long-lasting impacts on the city and urban life. So what we find is that security protection is driven by engineers, like myself, a recovering engineer, and by standards and international standards, which by nature, standards are designed to make decision-making relatively easy for professionals, but it does not always capture the local context by nature. They're international. They're meant to be good practice. What we find is security interventions that follow this standards practice is disrupting place. And by place, I mean the connections that we as humans make to public places. Think about your favourite park, your favourite walk. You know, you have this emotional connection to it. You have happy memories. You've shared moments with people there. This is place. It is how you respond to your local environment. Some great examples from the literature, for example, one in Federation Square, which is in Melbourne in Australia. The researcher Dali went out and spoke to people that came to this community and cultural hub that was recently delivered. It has significant amount of security there. And the quote is, "It's a bit scary when you see security coming to you all the time, being around all the time. I don't know if I feel safer or if I feel less safe. People always feel like they need to behave. It stops the space from being livelier." And then another quote from the UK around some of the legacy security infrastructure from the Olympic Games. "See all this security and all that? Does this mean this is going to be a high-risk place for a terrorist attack or something?" So we see, even from the community view, this paradoxical view of, I see the security, therefore I should be safe, but I feel unsafe. It's actually stopping me from wanting to enjoy this place. I'm thinking about security, and I think that shouldn't be the case. So why am I talking to you about this? Well, I've worked on a lot of public transport projects, over 300 kilometres of transit network, over 50 kilometres of tunnels, over 85 transit stops, ferries, light rail, heavy rail, metro rail. I've been responsible as the physical security subject matter expert for an $80 billion portfolio. I've been the author of the first multimodal physical security standard in Australia, and I was never told to think about this. No one had ever asked me to think about this. I had never been taught to think about this until I was challenged over and over again. I finally decided someone needed to think about this a bit further, and I started my PhD on this topic. So as we heard from Penella in her presentation yesterday, the traditional security design approach follows the Royal Institute of British Architects project delivery cycle. You start with strategic definition and preparation of the brief. This is the project feasible? What does it look like? We move into concept design, and the general spatial configuration of the project gets developed. From a railway perspective, how many entrances, is there an overstation development, where the lifts go, these types of things. We then move into develop design and technical design. This is where the engineers really get into the detail of where all the power outlets are going to go, where the cameras are going to sit, those types of things. We then move into construction. We build it, we hand it over, and then it goes into operations. Typically, security practitioners get involved in stage 3 and 4. All the big ticket configuration items have already been decided by the architects and the client before real security advice is brought into the project. And this, I believe, leads to some of these perverse outcomes in public places in particular. So I was following that approach, and as I said, there was a challenging moment that made me think about this a bit more deeply. And following that traditional planning approach of coming in later in the design, I was pulled aside by an urban planner, someone that I really appreciate. She's very, very good at what she does. And she was asking me, why do we need all these bollards? Like, it's just going to ruin the place quality and the place outcome. And we're sitting in the lunchroom, and I went through the usual spiel. As a security practitioner, you get sick of talking about bollards, so you just kind of automate the response. We need the bollards because we have a duty of care to our customers. We have regulations that we need to comply with. These are international standards. Everyone does it. I've spoken to the police and intelligence agencies. This is a credible threat. The usual process. She responded with, I understand all of that, but what's the point of protecting a place if there's not going to be anyone there to protect? Right. And after thinking about that for a minute, I asked her, what did she mean? And she pointed to a few other project examples where there was overt security and people weren't sitting on the benches that were provided. They were just transiting straight through. They were quite sterile places. So this spurned my desire to understand how we can better address security and urban design outcomes for the users of public places. And I stress the users, because generally this is an expert-led process with little interaction with the actual users who will be using the public place. So if we look at the literature, there's not a lot, but from what we can get out of the literature, we see this balancing act between these overt physical security controls, like bollards and lighting and screening and guards and police patrols and so on. This is to deter crime and terrorism. In the security literature, this is very important, this concept of deterrence. But what we see on the urban design literature is as that goes up, we start to see disruption of place quality, of connection, of liveliness, of accessibility, and so on. So we need to thread this balancing act between protecting people from foreseeable harm, but not disrupting the actual point of the public place that's being designed and delivered in the first place. So to understand this better, I'm a professional, but as any good academic, you need to step out of your own experience and actually ask others and make sure that you're on the right track. So I brought together 20 experts, 10 designers, so people from urban design, planning backgrounds and the like, and then 10 security practitioners, security managers of public places, security consultants who work on these projects. And I asked them what made public places safe from crime and terrorism. And I got them to brainstorm this. They came up with 73 unique design items that make public places safe. I then asked them to group and rate these so that I could run multidimensional scaling and hierarchical cluster analysis to come up with a slightly more rigorous concept map of how experts see public place security. I'm not sure why the image isn't coming up well here, but we have essentially 5 clusters of security intervention. So these outlines grouping the individual measures. And we have protective governance, which is the one on the left. This is things like response procedures, investigations, inspections, and so on. Towards the top, we have essentially preventative measures and deterrence. This is things like regulations and fines, visible patrols, security screening like metal detectors and the like. To the right of that, we have physical security. This is your typical CCTVs, bollards, other physical security measures like fences and so on. Below that, we have urban design and passive security. This is things like clear sight lines, having multiple exit points, green canopy, heat management, these more underlying design decisions that can influence people's behaviour. And then the last item we have is social and community factors. So these are more intangibles, things like social support networks, having coordinated neighbours in a precinct, eliciting user feedback about how a place is being managed and responding to that feedback. So this is how the experts view security in public places. But they disagree on the design approach, and that's a very useful image. I'll send some around if anyone's interested to see the full resolution. But essentially, if you can just make out the purple line towards the top, that's the urban design and the passive security measures there. So both groups, the left is the security practitioners and the right is the designers. They agree largely that those urban design measures are quite effective. Where we start to see the disagreements is the blue line, which is the social and community factors, those intangible elements. So the security group thinks they're still important for safe outcomes, but they're less for it, I suppose, than the design group. And I think this is because security practitioners like to be able to feel and touch and see the things that they're recommending to protect people. And then the other three items, which we also see a bit of difference in, is those physical measures, those overt physical security controls and deterrence, and so on. So when we talk about those different groups and how they look at public place security, I think we find that the design groups think more holistically about public places. We see they have a strong focus on those urban design and passive security measures. They use place quality and design as a key focus, and social cohesion and community factors are critical for their decision-making process. They see security, based on this data at least, as a subset of quality places, and I think they believe quality places are safe. And this is something I need to take into interviews to finalise, but this initial data is really starting to suggest to me that the security components of places is really just one element of place. Whereas if you look at the security practitioners, they see security more as an overlay of a place that's already been designed. And if you think back to that process of design, security comes in later, that would be a natural way of approaching that profession. The place decisions have already been made, you overlay your security controls over the top. It's not an integrated delivery. So we find that overt physical security measures tend to be more preferred by the physical security practitioners, which is not surprising. But what this leads to, both in the literature but also in practice, is this critical tension, which is again coming back to that balancing act we talked about. So we have these softer interventions, things like social and community orientated controls, that is more focused on the users and how the place is used. And on the other side is more of that regulatory asset protection driver, which is those harder physical security controls that you can actually touch. And what's challenging is the capital investment to build a place gets pulled in both directions. You want to build a place that brings people and they spend money, and you have food and beverage and your retail outlets and so on, but you also want to protect your investment. And this is a push-pull that happens in the delivery process as well. So for me, the missing element, we see in the literature, the urban design architecture group tend to just talk amongst themselves and don't necessarily engage the security practitioners. Security practitioners also talk amongst themselves in the literature and they don't really engage with the other side. And part of this research is to bring those groups together, but really it's a tie-break situation. Like we have this tension between two competing objectives in some respects. So what hasn't really been done in the literature, other than those few more interview style quotes that I gave you earlier, is to actually ask the community what they want and what they expect and what actually makes them feel safe. So to address this professional disagreement, I asked 72 members of the community to rate those 73 design items on a Likert scale about how safe they felt or how unsafe they would feel if they saw them in public places. And what this leads to, this is just a sample of some of the items, but these are the overt security controls or part of them. Overwhelmingly, generally, we see that these things make people feel safe, but there's a lot of people that also feel unsafe. So these are quite mixed perceptions on things like CCTV, physical security, signage, weapons screening, patrols, and so on. Passive interventions, those more urban design orientated elements, are overwhelmingly supported. So we still have a bit of this, a few people saying they don't feel safe for some elements like rules and behaviour signage, but much more stronger response on the positive side for these passive interventions. And if we use the Louvain method to sort of turn this into a network graph, so each item or each measure is its own node, and the edges are sort of the correlation between them, we see that the community doesn't think about security as sophisticated as you would expect the experts to. They really just see it into two groups: hard physical measures and soft measures that are more underlying in the environment. So this is important, I think, because when we're making decisions as experts, we need to think about how the community is going to understand and respond to these, and having this clear model of essentially soft measures as hard measures helps us achieve this balancing act in the design process. Applying sort of a male-female perspective on some of the data and looking at some of the, I guess, more general or semantic type approach to the data, we see that men typically are preferring more physical, authoritarian, technical controls. They like to see visible security, and they like to have something that's a little bit more response-orientated. Women in the data, and again, this is in the Western Australian context as well, tend to see more community-led social controls as more positive. And I think this reflects on how men and women navigate through public places, knowing that the community is there and active and responsive, and everyone is a bit more proactive. I think make women feel a bit safer. Men, I think, don't think about that as much, and they like to see that, yes, there's a camera, yes, there's a bollard. So this is something that needs a bit more investigation, but it's just interesting to see the spread along these axes. And the other thing that is interesting about this is the security industry, the profession, is primarily male-dominated. So I think this is where we might start to see this preference towards overt physical security controls, because if men inherently like that and think that makes them feel safe, they're naturally going to make those design decisions from a professional perspective as well. So when we talk about what the community likes overwhelmingly, we see good lighting, well-maintained spaces, connective and cohesive community, clear sightlines, and having response procedures in place, but importantly, knowing that it will be obvious that someone will actually respond as well. So these 5 elements really closely relate to something called crime prevention through environmental design. So we see that that is still a gold standard for how public places should be designed. Interestingly, the most controversial measures that had the least agreement were things like place inspections, so actively having people go and looking under in bins and the like for explosive devices and so on, so obvious inspections. Obvious security patrols or police patrols, so very heavy uniform presence. Obvious weapon screening points, so think about when you're going into a stadium or an airport, having these types of measures make people feel anxious. And probably only relevant to Western style communities, but video analytics was very, very contentious. So having the smarts behind the camera to do facial recognition, gait monitoring and the like, the Australian group really did not like that. But surprisingly in the cohort, this was very consistent against age, cultural background and living location, as well as education. So these positive measures are pretty broadly supported across the community data set. No. So talking about how to go forward from here and start to think about how we can embed this, talking about Penella's presentation yesterday, the need to bring security earlier into the design process, I think extends beyond just you'll save some money, developer. It's also you'll get a better place quality outcome. You'll have more people coming and staying, which means they're going to spend more money, which means you're going to have a better return on investment. So it's not just saving money on security by getting us in earlier, it's also making it a better place. So what I think we need to start looking at is how can we reduce overt protection as much as possible? And that's not the same as removing protection, it's just finding new ways of delivering that protection in a way that's less obvious. So we need to balance this overt deterrence-based approach of trying to turn criminals away towards making it a better place for people to stay and live and work and play in, because that naturally will bring that safety and that security. It's harder to measure, and I think that's something that the research needs to start looking at, is how we can measure that more effectively. Importantly as well, we need to position security as a component of place quality as opposed to a separate overlay or a management planning process. So consider that safe places appear to be strongly related to community acceptance, and therefore community engagement in the security design process is crucial for fit-for-purpose interventions. Currently, the process of security planning is a very siloed, expert-led activity. We have risk management workshops with other experts and police and so on, and we never ever speak to the community. I think a lot of the industry is still hiding behind this is sensitive, secret, terrorism shouldn't be spoken about openly, particularly security planning decisions that are made. And yes, that does hold true in some cases, but bringing in this community viewpoint can mean that the security that we do deliver is actually fit for purpose. And this proportionality conversation about not wanting to spend too much or too little, not wanting to overinvest and be too risk adverse versus not, I think we can get a better read on that level of protection through community consultation and engagement. So counter-terrorism, protective security and crime prevention strategies need to evolve beyond these hard lines of protection, these hard barriers, and find ways to build a broader resilience approach in the cityscape. So we can't expect security to be successful without that community involvement. And community ownership and acceptance of place provides this ongoing guardianship. So we find that if a place is well cared for and accepted by a community, the community will clean up after themselves, they'll report suspicious behaviour, they'll self-police each other in ways that are acceptable to that community group, which means you actually get better security outcomes over time. So going back to that 100-year challenge of transport precincts, yes, there will be active maintenance because it is a government-owned asset or privately operated asset. They need to clean the graffiti and the like. But if the community actually loves that precinct, they love that place, you naturally enhance the security of that place as well, beyond just the security guards that you're paying to walk around. So integrating security into the city fabric can increase resilience, and I think security practitioners need more understanding and more training into how to embrace place quality as a concept in their decision-making process. And just as much, the designers, the urban designers and the planners need to understand the security decision-making process better, as opposed to fighting it every step of the way. And I think this challenge of security wanting strong protection and planners and urban designers wanting none because it doesn't look great, it has all these other impacts. I think we need to find common ground and try and actively understand each other's point of view. And I think that will make a significant difference into delivering integrated security. We're seeing some steps towards this already. On the right here, we see the National Protective Security Authority in the UK. This is a quite recent publication looking at how to protect against vehicle attacks in the public place. Previous versions of this guide were a bit more overt in how you go about putting in bollards and the like. And now they're really starting to present this information in ways that designers can understand. It's more about principles as opposed to hard engineering requirements. So you can see things like chicanes and topography and having restricted and controlled spaces, using street furniture or level changes. This is more design language orientated as opposed to put bollards in that are rated to this type of crash rating. So that's it for me. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing from you in the crowd and having some great conversations afterwards. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. This QR code will take you there, or send me an email if you have any follow-up questions. But thank you very much.